Hello everybody, it's Mr. Second Amendment again, coming from the workbench to you for another constitutional-minded video. First of all, if you have not seen Know Your Constitution, Parts 1 and 2, here's the link. It's right here, right now, and I urge you to see that. It's just one man's opinion and interpretation of the United States Constitution, its founding, why it matters, who was part of it, why it was a unique historical event, and why we should remember and know the United States Constitution. So if you have not seen those videos, I strongly recommend that you see them. I'm going to refer to some stuff from it, but I am making this video as a kind of like a standalone video. So whether you've seen those or not, you can still understand. I'm not going to make this totally unacceptable for that. Anyway, moving on. This, as you can tell by the title, this video pertains to the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. Which is also, that's within the Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution. And of course, you can see by my username, you know, I've got mixed reviews from my username. I have some people like, right on, man, that's awesome. I have some people who, you know, don't know what the Second Amendment, what I'm even referring to. They have no idea. And if you're one of those people, no harm, no foul. We just, you know, we gotta step it up. We gotta get aware and kind of know what our Constitution is, what it says, and what it means. So, again, I'm going to be working on a project here. This happens to be an 1851 Colt Navy, for those of you who know. But I'm just doing my project stuff. I want to keep you guys visually occupied here while I'm doing this. But anyway, moving along, I don't want to make this a million-hour video. I really, really appreciate you guys watching. I really do. It means a lot, and hopefully we can all benefit from this. Anyway, thank you again. Let's get into it. Alright, so if you didn't watch the constitutional videos, that's okay. We'll recap just very quickly in a couple sentences. We won our War of Independence against Great Britain, which started in 1775 and ended itself in 1783 with Cornwallis' surrender at Yorktown. Treaty of Paris, which was our basically peace treaty. Then we moved on. So then we had, initially we had, in terms of the legal, like how this country was run, how the United States was run after the Revolutionary War, basically we had the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, which is kind of an awkward phrase, if you ask me. It wasn't really working out. It was kind of a shit show, to say the least about it. We needed to come up with something different. Basically, there was a constitutional convention set up in Philadelphia to figure out what are we going to do about this failure and how are we going to move forward with something that can actually work. They basically created, or they adopted the Constitution in 1787. They ratified it in 1788 and it actually started to take effect in 1789. So it basically fixed a lot of the problems of the Articles of Confederation. It made the national federal government stronger and whatnot, and you know, I don't want to get into all the details because we could be here for hours, so I'm just going to keep moving on. Highly recommend you look into that, by the way, and watch the videos. Can't stress that enough. Moving on, what is the Bill of Rights? Basically, the Bill of Rights is a list of rights that every man or person in the United States is entitled to, that the government cannot abuse or take away. And why is such a thing why does it even exist? First of all, basically we had just finished getting out of a war with Great Britain where the king and the crown were basically abusing many rights, and they were being tyrannical, they were doing many things. And actually, if you look through the 10 amendments, if you look through them, at least 7 or 8 of them actually, 8, the first 8 to be exact, you're going to see a lot of things that King George III and the crown were doing. Such as, let's talk about the Third Amendment, the Quartering Act, the quartering, where basically troops cannot be quartered in civilian housing, so the government can't just show up with their troops and say, you're going to feed and take care of these guys for the next week, which is what King George is doing. Second Amendment comes from the initial outburst that happened, the shot heard around the world, basically the confrontation that started this nation, where King George was trying to take away the firearms and basically the control or the ability of the colonists to defend themselves and revolt. So that comes from that. You have the First Amendment. I'm not really going to get too deep into it, but basically you have First Amendment, freedom of religion, which the king didn't really mess with, but it also has freedom of the press, freedom of expression, self-expression, a bunch of other things that were kind of definitely getting abused and neglected when the king was in charge. So there was a lot of, if you look through the Bill of Rights, you're going to see a lot of things that the Founding Fathers were afraid of, that were going to happen again if we were to have a strong central government again. So basically, they had a really bad taste in their mouth from King George, and they wanted to lay out the rights to ensure the government wasn't going to trample again on their individual liberties. Now, the second reason why we have a Bill of Rights is because I would argue, and I think many historians would also agree, that the founding of the United States of America was a very unique event, and I don't believe anything before or since has been seen like it. It was basically founded right after the brink of the Enlightenment. You had your thinkers, philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, where they were believing in natural rights of man. This was a very revolutionary concept, and kind of stepping back from that, something I talked about in the constitutional videos. If you haven't seen them, you need to kind of look at this stuff through an 18th century contextual set of eyeglasses. You have to take off your 21st century glasses and look at it through the context of the 18th century. Because if you don't, it's gonna be impossible to fully understand the gravity of the situation and all these matters. But basically, at the time, the thought that every man was entitled to certain unalienable rights, natural rights of man, that was a huge controversial idea back then, where monarchies and aristocracies were rampant in the old world, and that basically changed the game. So by setting up a Bill of Rights, this supported our founding. It also supported, basically set up preventative measures to ensure that our government would not abuse the citizens like King George did. So moving on, gonna finish harping on that point. So we move on to the actual Bill of Rights itself. There's 10 amendments. If you look at the constitutional video, one of the articles in the Constitution is basically provisions how amending the Constitution works. And they used it initially. Now, and there's some things we got to talk about with the Bill of Rights. Initially, when the Constitution was being ratified and discussed then ratified, I should say, there was some people, some of our founding fathers didn't think that we should have a Bill of Rights. And you think about that right now, like, what? There's founding fathers that actually didn't think we should have rights enumerated on a Bill of Rights? The answer is yes, that's actually true. One of them being Thomas Jefferson. Why, you ask? Why would the founding fathers, after everything they had just gone through, why would they not want a list of rights given to every person? And the answer is because they were afraid. They were concerned that the government would look at that list and say, well, they have this, but we're going to go all the way, we're going to snake around, we're going to do everything that's outside of that list, and we'll abuse the shit out of it. And they were afraid that that was going to happen. And then you had your pro-Bill of Rights people. In fact, you had 3 states, Massachusetts, New York, and Virginia, that were downright refused to ratify the Constitution if there was going to be no provisions or a Bill of Rights. So compromise, good old American compromise had to happen. Basically, that's where the 9th Amendment comes from, the Enumeration Amendment, where that basically says, okay, well, these are the amendments, but just because we didn't list them, just because we listed these rights doesn't mean that these are the only rights that every citizen has. So basically, they left the door open for abusers and tyrants to basically sit there and be like, oh, well, it's enumerated, so there could be some rights that legally wouldn't hold up if I tried to abuse it, even though it's not listed in the Bill of Rights. Anyway, moving on from that whole situation, 1789, if I remember right, the Bill of Rights is created, and finally in 1791 it is ratified and is part of the Constitution. So that was a big, if you look at it, oops, sorry, I hit the camera. That was a big leap of faith, and I talk about that in the constitutional videos. That was a huge leap of faith that these 3 states and everyone else were kind of waiting to get a Bill of Rights. They spent 2 years, about 2 years, with no Bill of Rights. And yeah, from 1789, when the Constitution took effect, to 1791, that was about a 1.5-2 year period where they didn't have a Bill of Rights, and they were hoping and praying that that the promises would ring true and it would actually happen, and it did. So, basically, like I said, the Bill of Rights talks about stuff that King George was doing, and basically puts those barricades up so tyrants can't abuse stated enumerated rights. So let's move on to the Second Amendment, and of course that's where my username comes from, Mr. Second Amendment. I've gotten many comments about my username. Most people tend to like it. Some people don't know what the Second Amendment is, and they're wondering what exactly that is. What is that? What is the Second Amendment? And basically, if you are one of those people, you don't know what I'm talking about, well, let's get you up to speed. My passion, as you can see by my other videos, is the Second Amendment. It is the use and ownership, responsible use and ownership of firearms in a free society. And basically I work towards perpetuating that responsible ownership. And the Second Amendment, let me just read it to you from my mind here. And correct me if I'm wrong, I know you internet trolls are going to look it up just to make sure, but the Second Amendment, just from memory here, I should have got some notes. The Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, if you look up the Second Amendment debate, there's going to be a lot of talk about grammar and basically conjugation or commas and capitalizing certain words and whatnot. Now, a lot of those people forget to take off their 21st century glasses, put on those 18th century glasses. You look at, for example, the preamble to the United States Constitution, that is one giant, what we would call in modern day, run-on sentence. So you can't take modern American English rules of grammar and apply that to your 18th century document. It's not going to compute, and you're going to get confused and you won't even know it. Take off the 21st century glasses. Now, if I remember right, internet trolls and researchers and dedicated patriots back me up or correct me if I'm wrong. It says a well-regulated militia, comma, pause, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, pause, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, pause, shall not be infringed. And I believe right, if the text of it, the text that was actually adopted by the Congress, it did have militia and arms capitalized in writing. So they took those ideas very seriously, and I see it as, different points being made. It's 3 points in one statement. 1, a well-regulated militia. 2, being necessary to the security of a free state. 3, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And final statement, shall not be infringed. When they say free state, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the country at large from external threats? Or are they talking about internal threats? And they're actually talking about, you guessed it, both. Security of a free state. Now, when we take that oath to join the military, we had to say, as part of the oath, to uphold and defend the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Foreign and domestic, on a foreign battlefield or a battlefield at home, against internal threats, which could be, for example, Lexington and Concord, April 19th, 1775, or it could be something like the War of 1812, when we actually did have an invasion, or, you could even take it back to the 40s when Japan invaded parts of Alaska, the Aleutian Islands. How far do you want to take it? How far do you want to go? But essentially, that's how I regard the free state statement in there. Right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I don't really know how much more, using those 18th century glasses, understanding the context of it and that day, I don't understand how more clear it has to get. Now, if you look at, let's keep all the grammar, let's take all that complication and craziness out of it. Let's just look at our founding fathers, what they did, and even what they said outside the Declaration and the Constitution. What did they say? Well, maybe I didn't do some notes, but I did, boom, print off some quotes that I thought would be relevant. First of all, moving along here. The great object is that every man be armed, and everyone who is able may have a gun. You know who said that? Patrick Henry. You should know who that gentleman is. Next thing, this comes from the Federalist Papers, an oldie but a goodie. And if you haven't read the Federalist Papers, that is maybe just because my bachelor's was in history, and that is my obsession, especially the founding of this nation. But If you want some just tasteful, awesome, exciting reading, not even being sarcastic, look at the Federalist Papers. If you haven't read them, you should read through them. Our Supreme Court has used it throughout the decades, and it makes for good, interesting reading if you want to see the backstory of what our founding fathers were thinking. Anyway, moving on. Side point. The best we can help for concerning the people at large is that they be properly armed. That comes from Alexander Hamilton from the Federalist Papers. Of course, he was a Mondo Federalist up there with George Washington, created the National Bank, all that stuff. Moving on. One of my favorite founding fathers, perhaps my favorite for sure, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson had a lot to say about the topic of firearms in a free society. So let's bring out Mr. Jefferson. The strongest reason for people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is, as a last resort, to protect themselves against tyranny in government. Okay, that comes from one of our presidents. Next thing, no free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. Which brings me to my next point. I view, and maybe this is just me being crazy, but I view ownership of firearms in a nation as the barometer of freedom, as the gauge that shows me how free that country is. If people are absolutely restricted from having firearms, it is a lengthy or hard process or an impossible process to own firearms, I view that country as hostile to freedom. I do. Because look at the people. Look at the people. Do they have the right to defend themselves? Maybe, let's not even talk about the right. Let's not even talk about a legal or philosophical discussion. Let's talk about capability. If they don't have guns, can they defend themselves? The answer is no. And we have many historical reasons to support that. Let me bring out another quote from a very powerful man. This year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation has full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead into the future. Do you know who said that? There's a gentleman from Austria, World War I vet, by the name of Adolf Hitler. And I don't need to crack open the history lecture to have you realize the implication of that. What he did is, just a little side note, is he took the guns away. So the only people who had the guns were people that he liked, Nazi Party officials, the government, the police, the military. Guess who didn't have the guns? Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, legal and political opponents. And you know what happened to them? Well, let's say it wasn't awesome. It was actually horrifying. It was one of our darker moments, and there's no need to really beat that dead horse. We all pretty much know what happened. But look what happens to people who cannot defend themselves. This isn't a joke. This isn't a game. This is real. This is very real, and this happened in our last century, and in parts of Africa and other parts of the world, Syria and whatnot. This is happening again. Whoever doesn't have guns can't protect themselves from evil or tyrannical forces, both internal and external of their country. And if you don't realize that, you're wrong. You don't understand. You don't have the context. This looks like it's going to have to be a mini two-parter. So I'm going to stop it for here. And thanks for watching part 1. Didn't want it to be a two-parter, but guess what it is. So thank you so much for watching part 1. And here's the link. It should be up there right now for part 2. So thank you so much.